Hello, welcome back to my channel. Hello weirdos. I am so tired. My sleeping schedule has been super off lately. And I have exactly zero clue why. I slept for 10 hours on Saturday, Friday night. And then today I woke up at 5 a.m. and got 5 hours of sleep, and then I took an hour nap. So I don't know what the fuck is going on. That's not why we're here. We're not here to discuss my strange sleeping patterns. What this video is me talking about all of the books that I read in February. I also have tea. These have pandas on it. I love this mug. I got this mug in DC. It's also still very hot. Right, so I only read 11 books in February. And honestly, I was kind of surprised that I even made it to 10 because my whole mental health was very torpedoed in February, and the fact that I finished any books at all is a feat. Because I only finished 2 prior to the news of my grandfather passing. And so the rest of the 9 that I read were kind of miracles. Maybe it was 3, but anyway, it was a low number. So the very first book that I finished was The Woman They Could Not Silence. This is one woman and her incredible fight for freedom and the men who tried to make her disappear. This is by Kate Moore. I've read Kate Moore's stuff in the past, and I have enjoyed it. I really enjoyed The Radium Women. I think that this is in the same vein. It's also very interesting. It is about this one woman who is put in an asylum because she does not agree with her husband's religious views. She has her own mind and she speaks it. And this was a really difficult book to read because I started this over the summer when everything with Roe v. Wade happened. So I was just very angry when I started this, and my feelings kind of continued through out reading this. And this book is meant to make you angry because you think that this is so ridiculous, but then you realize how insidious that what people would do intentionally to hold women down, to prevent women from speaking their minds and becoming their own people, and how it was so easy to do it. I think you only needed her husband only needed one doctor's agreement to keep her hospitalized, and she really had to fight to not be hospitalized anymore, and it really made me angry. And this whole time I was feeling while I was reading this, I'm this is so similar to stuff today. This silencing of women, this not believing of women, you could take what is happening there and copy and paste it to what is stuff that is happening today. And it was very frustrating in that way to read it. It made me very angry at times, and that's intentional. And there is a part in the very back when the author does make those implicit lines drawn and very clear. I don't think that it was necessary. However, I get why Kate Moore did that, because some people are just knuckleheads and will be oh, that's in the past, we don't have to deal with that anymore. But Kate Moore drawing those specific lines to what is happening now, I thought could be very helpful for that. I personally didn't need it. The one thing that I will say about this book is that it is very long, and I feel at times it was unnecessarily long. The chapters are short, so they're easy to fly through. However, my problem was I would fly through a number of chapters and be what was kind of the purpose of having this be 3 different chapters? Because it really did feel a lot of the same thing said over and over again. And that kind of brought it down for me, because I guess I was I'm here, I got it, I got the point, can we continue on with the story? But no, I felt like we had to belabor like the same point over and over and over again. So it reads well. The writing style is a little bit different than other histories because it will make up a lot of like the thoughts that some of the people who are experiencing things, like it will talk about like the main author's like feelings about her children, when it's like, okay, we really actually don't know exactly what happened when she came home. So if you like more of that narrative style, this definitely has more of a narrative style, which only bugged me occasionally. Next one is, okay, yeah, I did finish. Okay, no. Okay, I finished like 4 books before everything happened, so that makes me feel a little bit better. The next book that I finished is The Violin Conspiracy. This is by Brendan Slocum. I really enjoyed this. This is a like mystery trying to figure out what happens to this young black man's violin. This violin that he has is Stradivarius, and he is going to practice at this competition, or he is going to practice like in New York or something for this huge upcoming competition, right? And so he gets on the plane with his case that he thinks the Stradivarius is on. He thinks everything's great. I'm just gonna get off this flight. I'm gonna like break out my violin and I'm gonna do like some practicing. And he opens the violin case and there's his Stradivarius is missing, but instead he finds a ransom note. So that is like the whole conceit of it. And what I really liked so much about this book was number one, just that the author is also a musician, so you really get those details in like what it is like to play an instrument, the devotion, and like that whole relationship between like the musician, the instrument, and like the experience of playing instruments and the music. You could tell that there was like a real passion and love and like real understanding behind what was being written, which I really appreciated. But it also like took like a larger overview of like what it does mean to be a African, like a black musician at the top of their game, and all of the racism and stuff that you have to deal with, to the point where like the mystery behind like the what happens to the violin really becomes secondary. And like you kind of are like, you have like this whole backstory about like what like his relationship, but I really was more intrigued by the main character's like experiences and his life growing up, and how he came to attain the violin, then actually figuring out what happens to the violin. And by the time we get back to the the competition, because I cannot pronounce the Rite of Spring's composer's name because I'm a dumbass, I was really gripped and I was really invested in seeing our main character succeed. And then it shifts back to like the mystery and trying to figure out what on earth happened to the violin. And I remember I was sitting there and I was like, I think that's this person. I don't know, there's just something about the vibe that person was giving off that it was just like, yeah, nobody else really seems to have a good enough motive. This person, though, there's no explanation. And I was right, and I felt so vindicated. I was like, I figured it fucking out. I didn't get, like, the reason why, but I clocked the person, and that made me feel really good. Yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I really recommended it. Actually, a funny story. So I went to the theater with this book because why would you go anywhere without books? And I went to go see Made in China 2.0, which was a fabulous show at the Paramount downtown in Boston. And I went and I sat I got there like super early because I was just like, I just don't know the timing of things yet. I sat at a cafe across the street and I was reading like this book, The Violin Conspiracy, and somebody like pulled me aside and was like, I've never seen people read books. I don't see that anymore. Like, is this a good book? And I was like, told this person about the book and that you should read it because I was really enjoying it at the time. And I was just like, this is weird. Like, you don't see people reading like out in the wild? Do you just don't go outside? I don't understand, but maybe that's because I take public transportation and people are reading all of the time on public transportation, so I don't know. And in coffee shops, so I'm just like, where do you live? Obviously not here. And then, like, I want to say less than an hour later, I go and I sit in my seat at the theater talking to my friends, who I ran into, which was a whole different story that was hilarious. This person who's sitting behind me is just like, is that a good book? And I'm like, yeah, like, what are the odds of two people within, like, an hour of each other asking me about this book? So that's a funny story about this book. The next book that we have is Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. And I don't know how to feel about this book. I want to say I really like it because it mixes, like, therapy and science. But I don't know if it was just, like, the really casual tone, or if some of the advice I just didn't really, like, vibe with. But I don't know. I kind of, like, I wanted to really like this. But I ultimately, like, I'm just like, I just don't know. I just don't know if it's not for me or whatnot. I can't quite put my finger on what was off about this book. I know I had something, like, before, like, while I was reading it, I was like, this is the reason why. I don't know if it's because even though it is well researched and the author talks a lot about her research process, it sometimes feels a lot like pseudoscience. And maybe it was just that, like, the definition of irony really rubbed me the wrong way. Because it was like, oh, irony is sarcasm, but with, like, mean-spiritedness behind it. And I'm like, but that's not what irony is. And so I don't know if that just really put a bad taste in my mouth for the rest of the book. Because it was really just like, that just, like, I'm like, did we miss English class? Because I remember thoroughly learning what irony is, and dramatic irony and situational irony. So I'm like, I definitely don't use, like, irony in malicious ways. So yeah, I just don't know how to feel about this book. And the reason I read this is because it won the BookTube prize for, I want to say, like, nonfiction or something like that. Was it the worst one that could have won? No. I think I just left this book feeling very confused. Maybe it was just the audiobook, and the following along that I just did not jive with, because the audiobook and the book don't actually match up. And that, like, drives me nuts. And so, like, you will have the, like, book as it's written, and, like, the author, I think, is reading it, and so she'll be like, oh, let's talk about happiness. She'll read the definition of happiness, and then she'll be like, in the audiobook, she'll be like, let me read that again just one more time, just so that it's really emphasized. And those words aren't in the actual book, and that drives me fucking badonkers. Like, it really, really bothered me. And she'll also be like, oh, let's talk next about sadness. And, like, those books, let's talk next about sadness, aren't in the actual book. And I don't know if it's just a really weird thing for me to get, like, really bothered by, but it really irritated me because I couldn't follow along with the actual book, with the audiobook. And that is my preferred method of reading, and when I can't do that, it really, really grates. And I think in the audiobook, the author was going for a more podcast-style version, and I just couldn't. And she also attempts to describe the visuals that are in the book, and I just don't see why. Because this is, like, another problem that I had with the visuals, is that it's printed, like, I think the book would have, like, if I would have purchased it, it would have been $40, because it's printed on this nice, like, colored paper. The whole book is printed like that. And I just don't really see the reason as to why, because there were visuals, and some of the comics and stuff like that that were interspersed were very, very powerful and very, very moving, like when it talked about, like, grief and stuff like that, showing what they showed. Like, those visuals were, sure, impactful, but they're so infrequent that I'm just kind of like, why did you print it on this paper? Like, why? Like, it just felt underutilized with the design of the whole book, when I think it was really meant to be, like, this multi, like, medium thing, and it just wasn't, or it wasn't utilized to its fullest potential. And I was just very confused. I wanted to like it, but it just didn't work out for me. The next one I read was Strike the Zither. This is by Joan He, and I wanted to love this, and I just didn't. I don't know what it is about this, but I just didn't care, like, the entire time. So you have Zephyr, who's the main character, who is a strategist. This is during, like, the 3 states, like, warring period. This is its own made-up story, and she's so devoted to Shinran, who's her, like, lordess, who's, like, her master. And she very quickly leaves her lordess to go attach herself to this other person who is an awful person, and it is made very clear that this person is an awful person. And through the process, like, falls in love, and there's a lot of, like, not spiritual, but mystical things that happens. And I don't quite know how to describe how those pieces just don't all fit together. Or at least it didn't for me. I felt like Zephyr and Shinran should have spent more time together at the beginning so that I would have understood their relationship more, and why Shinran is so why Zephyr is so devoted to Shinran to the point of what she does in the rest of the books. Did not feel like the romance was necessary in this book. I feel like all of the supernatural stuff kind of comes up a little bit out of the blue. And so having that stuff more integrated in earlier, and kind of set a precedence for, and, like, laid the groundwork and dropped nuggets of and foreshadowed, probably would have helped that. But it just didn't, and I really, really struggled with caring really about any of the characters. And I feel really, really bad for saying this, because I really, really wanted to read like this. I do not know if I own any more of Joan He's stuff. I'm not seeing any that come off to my head, but I don't know. I'm always gravitated to the artwork that Joan He uses. Really, really wanted to like this. And I just didn't care. Maybe I should give it another try. I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. Did any of you really like this? And that I should try this again? Let me know. Okay, that's the end of the books that I read before everything happened with my grandfather. The rest of these happened after. The first book that I finished is I Am Quiet by Andy Powers. This is a children's book about introverts. It was cute. It won the middle grade and children's literature thing for the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I read it because I have it, and I was like, I should read something. And I want to read something that is short, that will get me kind of, like, moving towards a goal, because yeah, all my reading kind of stopped, and I just was not reading. You can look at my chart for February, and there's, like, a lot at the beginning, more-ish at the end, and, like, in the middle of the month, it's just yeah, that's an accurate description. So yeah, I thought this was, like, fine. I don't understand how to rate picture books, because I don't read them, and I don't have children that are interested. The next book that I finished was Binti. This is by Nnedi Okorafor, and I really enjoyed this. I was not expecting the everybody dies bits, but I did really like the description of Binti's home, and Binti's relationship with just things, and how she uses her connections to her culture to survive, to do the things that she does. And I am very curious to see what happens next with Binti. I want to get the other books. I liked the introduction of the stuff like the Medus, which are, like, these pseudo-villains? Can you really call them villains? But I read this, like, all in one sitting, because it's less than 100 pages. It's a novella. Really, really easy to breeze through, and I think the other ones are novellas, and I read this. This is the first book that I read for the Blackathon. And yeah, really, really enjoyed it. I own more of this author's work. I think I have it with me at this current time, but I will be looking forward to reading more. The next book that I finished is The Henna Artist. This is by Alika Joshi. For a while, while reading this, I was like, okay, this is interesting. We're following this one woman, and her life and her rebuilding of her life after leaving her husband. This is set in like the 1950s in India. I really kind of was like, oh, I don't really like get, like, kind of, I was like, okay, like, I don't really get it. And then we have the introduction of her sister. And then I put this down for a while because I made the stupid decision to try and read like 24 books all at the same time. Poor decision. So I like started reading this last September and I'm just now finishing it. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. But I got a pretty decent of the way, like I think I got like maybe a third of the way through when I put it down and then I put it back up. And it gets intense. Younger sister is something. She's very young and she's very easily taken advantage of. And I don't really want to say more because I feel like that is very, very important. There is a sequel to this that's following some of the other characters in this that I liked. And I feel like I'm kind of like going back and forth. I'm like, do I continue with the series? Do I not? I'm not. I read the description. I'm like, okay, the second book does sound interesting. But I'm also looking at all of my bookshelves and all of the books that I have to read. And I'm like, do I really need to be adding more books? I mean, ultimately, yes. I mean, yes. But I'm trying to do this thing where I don't buy more books than I read. And I'm currently like 10 books behind. So it's going to be one of those things like if I see the sequel, I'm going to pick it up at a bookstore and probably read it at some time. But I think the books are independent enough that you don't really need to read them like one right after the other. Yeah, the reason it's called Henna Artist is because the main character is a henna artist. Very, very interesting and very, very good. The next book that I read is The Snake Who Loved a Sparrow. This is by Natsu. This is a manga, and this shit is gay. I thought it was very cute. I think I kind of wanted it to be longer to kind of build the relationship between the snake and the sparrow. I think maybe this is why I prefer Danmei over like BL, because in Danmei you really, really like there is no such thing as a short Danmei. Okay, no such thing. But this I found like, you know, cute and delightful. I'm gonna try and find not a spicy scene. Here's a little example of the artwork that is inside. Yeah, I thought it was really, really interesting. You know, you have a literal sparrow who falls in love with a literal snake that they can like transform, and it's set in like this pseudo like mythological Japanese world, and it was very, very cute. And the author says like in the end, she's like, they were just like, I'm not expecting to research as much animal genitalia as I did, and so there are spicy scenes in this, so be aware of that. It took me like one afternoon to read this. I did pre-order this, so I guess Amazon knows that I really love gay shit now, so because that's all it recommends to me, which, oh no, how horrible. The next book that I read is Buffalo is the New Buffalo. This is by Chelsea Vole. This is the last book that I read for the Boston winter reading thing. Yeah, this was my pick for Americas. I picked this because it is queer, and I was not expecting that this did not have an audiobook, so this is why this one finished last. I finished it last because it does not have an audiobook. So this is a collection of short stories, and it is kind of like, what does the author call it? I want to say Matisse Futurism. You have all these, it's a series of short stories, and each of these short stories, science fiction in nature, which I really enjoyed. I don't read a lot of short stories that are sci-fi, and I was digging it. And there also, a lot of them are queer, and they deal and grapple with like stuff that matters to all of us, but from a like Matisse lens. I'm trying to think which one was my favorite. I think the last one. Ooh, that's hard. Like, Unsettled was good, but I don't know if that's just the last one. Yeah, Buffalo Bird. I Bison was also really good. They're all really good, and they all grapple with different things, and they're queer stories. Yeah. I don't know. Check this out if you are looking for Indigenous authors doing really cool things in the sci-fi genre. The next book that I finished is House of Hunger. This is by Alexis Henderson, and this is another gay story because this is sapphic. We have like sapphic vampires. I straight up thought this was set in America and was very confused for a very long time. I had to get over the fact that this is not set in America. This is in Fantasyland. In this world, you have these things called blood maids. They are people who literally bleed and let the wealthy upper class from the north bleed, like drink from their blood. So like they're kind of like vampires. You have this young woman who is in dire financial straits, so she decides that she wants to become a blood maid for the House of Hunger. This is very horny. It is very horny. I'm not expecting it to be this horny, to the point where I was like, can I bring this to school? Like, I know I can't bring this to school. I like would open it like on school property and I'd be like, oh, okay. Like, I don't think I can read this. I don't think this can be here. And it's not that it's like explicit things like are like being described. It's not like it's not like they're full-blown sex scenes. It's just permeated throughout everything. And like, I'm here for it. I'm here for the horniness of it. I was like, no, maybe not at a school setting. I did really enjoy this. I think just my personal preference about the ending, I just would have preferred that it left us a little bit more ambiguity on whether stuff was over or not. But I think the way that it ended was fine. But there was something that happens like shortly before the ending where I was like, oh, like, I don't know. Maybe my idea would have been like too out there. Or maybe not made as much sense, but I don't know. I kind of like the idea of like this hunger transferring over to the main character in a way that it doesn't. But yeah, if you want sapphic gothic horror, yes, this. I read this because it was the runner-up. No, it wasn't the runner-up. It was my dog chose this one for horror. And I loved it. And I normally say that I don't like magical stuff. And this does have magical things. But I don't know. It worked for me. The sapphic horror horny book was really good. Give it a try. I've been recommending it to a bunch of my friends. Last book that I read was The Memory Librarian, and this is kind of this is also queer. This is by Janelle Monáe, and it's The Memory Librarian and Other Stories of Dirty Computers. This I thought was fine. Like, I like the concepts of it. It was kind of hard to get into at times. This is another one of those like short stories that are all happening like within the same world. And I was having trouble jumping from one to the other. But once I got into the new story, it was like, okay, I'm getting into the rhythm of what is happening. It just sometimes took a while for me to get integrated into what is happening and getting invested into the world. This is another thing with massive sapphic vibes. What I really loved was there were people referred to in this futuristic society by like mix, whatever, which is the term that I use. And so I really liked this idea of like in the future, like there is no assuming of gender when you first meet somebody. And I just really appreciated that. I really liked that aspect of this book. And I loved the queerness in like all of the stories. So what this book is about is like, so it's kind of set in a world where you have like the totalitarian government, this government who has a stranglehold on time and memory and is using those things to control people. And all of these play with differences of like, or not differences, but play with those ideas from like different perspectives from different people. And I thought that it was interesting. It just, took me a while to get into all of the short stories. There's only a total of 5, so each one is pretty long. Which ones are standouts to me? I really liked The Memory Librarian, I really liked Time Box, and I like Time Box Altered. I think those are my 3 favorites. Save Changes I think was my least favorite because I think Save Changes is hardest to follow because it deals with like changing the past and the repercussions of that, which might just be a person with me. So saying on the back that this is a narrative expansion from the universe of the Electric Lady's Dirty Computer Album and Emotion Picture, which I didn't know anything about. Do I need to check those out to help me better understand The Memory Librarian? I don't know. Let me know. Fun fact, this skyline behind this person in the back, that's Chicago. I don't know if that's purposeful or not, but it's Chicago. They tried to like disguise it by like, this is like North Chicago in the back. But you still have the Hancock building. You still have that building, which is pretty distinctive, and some other buildings that just make it very, very obvious that it's the Chicago skyline. And I thought that was funny. If I wasn't from Chicago, I don't know if I would get that. And that's all of the books that I read. I read 11 in total. Really happy that I made it to my goal, but I did read a graphic novel, and I did read a picture book, and I did read a novella to make it to that number. So, I don't know. I'm not doing this as well this year and front loading a lot of my reading. But that's okay. I'm only like 3 books ahead, whereas I think last year by this time I was a lot more than 3 books ahead, but I'm trying to give myself patience and grace because a lot more is happening. So I know that if I'm keeping on the pace of 10 books a month, or 10 books a year, I will be good to finish and make my goal. So this year, so far in this month, it is the 5th of March. When I'm filming this, I've read 2 so far, so we'll see. I'm going to sign off because I need to feed myself. I know, boring. Goodbye.